Welcome to the mysterious world of real horror stories. Here, we'll guide you through dark alleys where the truth can be even scarier than fiction. Each story holds valuable lessons and unforgettable experiences. If you're ready to explore strange encounters and unexplainable secrets, hit that like button and subscribe now to start. I lived alone in a modest house and realized I would likely miss any trick-or-treaters since I had to work late. To make sure the kids didn't miss out, I left a bowl of candy on my front step. Aside from that, I didn't do much to celebrate Halloween. At work, we had a few decorations, but I was swamped with tasks, and the drive home took about 15 minutes. By then, the roads were fairly quiet. I remember, though, that when I was about a mile or so from my house, I saw this guy dressed as a clown standing on the side of the road. He was sort of off in the ditch, and this was just a sort of quiet road with woods on both sides, so it was weird that he would be standing there. As I drove by, the clown man waved at me. I knew that it was somebody dressed up for Halloween, probably trying to scare people. I waved back and continued my drive home. Just a couple of minutes later, I arrived at my neighborhood. My street was pretty typical, with many houses on it, and at this hour, all the trick-or-treaters were done, so it was now very quiet. However, as I approached my driveway, I noticed something. There was another guy fully dressed as a clown, wearing a mask and everything. He was standing right in the middle of my driveway in front of the garage, holding a balloon. Even with it being Halloween, I was still creeped out at the sight. I started to pull into my driveway, but I stopped at the back end of it. The clown looked directly at me but did not wave or anything. I thought that maybe he would walk away or something, but he stayed put. So I rolled down my window a little and called out to him. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He didn't acknowledge me at all, and he just kept standing there, holding his balloon. I told him that I had to get my car into the garage and that he was in my way. He still didn't move though, so at that point, I wasn't really sure what to do. After like a full minute of me sitting there with the car running, I decided to just get out and go inside. I figured that the clown would move eventually. I parked my car at the very back end of the driveway, still a good 30 feet or so from the clown. Then I turned my engine off and got out. The clown was still standing there, continuing to look at me. Right when I started to take a few steps into my yard, the clown began to walk toward me, and he was walking at an angle where he would reach me before I got to my front door. So I stopped, and when I stopped, he did as well. I didn't know if it was a good idea to go for my front door anymore because I would have to unlock it, and if he was going to chase after me, he would be able to catch up with me. Then, all of a sudden, I saw 3 more clowns come running out from behind my house. They were literally sprinting and heading in my direction. I didn't waste any time, and I instantly ran back for my car. I quickly got inside of it, locked the doors, and then scrambled to start my engine as quickly as I could. The 3 clowns, as well as the original one, ran right up to my car. One tried opening my driver's door and the other my passenger's one. Within seconds, I was able to back out of the driveway, leaving them standing there. They didn't follow me into the street, but just kept standing at the end of my driveway. As I drove away, they all at once started waving at me. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. I drove out of my neighborhood and just went around random streets for like 5 to 10 minutes. Then I went back home, hoping that the clown men would be gone. If they were still there, I was going to call the cops, but thankfully when I arrived back, they were all gone. I got out of my car and looked through my backyard as well as the front, and nobody was there. But when I got to my front door, I saw that the balloon that the one clown had been holding was now tied to my door handle. It was one last thing to really creep me out. I went inside and was a little worried that the clowns might return, but they didn't. That was my scariest experience that I've had during Halloween. Close to the town I live in, there was an old and abandoned house out in the country. It was a bit of a drive out of town, so a lot of people in my school talked about it, but they rarely ever went out to it. One Halloween, however, a friend of mine who had his license decided that he wanted to go out and see the house. That year, it didn't take much to convince the rest of our friend group to come along. There were 6 of us all together, cramped into the car, and we waited until after dark to go out there to make it scarier since it was Halloween night. All of us got out of the car after we pulled into the yard of the house. The yard was pretty big and there were tons of overgrown plants. There were no lights from nearby houses or street lights, so the only light was the flashlights that we brought with us. We started walking up to the house slowly from the car. My friend kept shining his light ahead of us onto the house. I watched as he moved his light on the house, checking out different parts of it. I stopped, though, when I saw something on the porch of the house. Although I only caught a glimpse of it as his light hit it, it seemed out of place. I checked out what I had seen with my own flashlight, and there on the porch was a pumpkin. It wasn't an old, decaying pumpkin that we would have expected to see in an abandoned house either. I told my friends that somebody might be living inside the house since there was a freshly carved pumpkin. My friend shrugged it off, though, saying it was Halloween and some other kids probably put it there as a joke. We decided to continue, and we were still walking when I heard a noise from the side of the house. I shined my light over in the area just in time to catch somebody coming up to the side of the house. There was a man on the side of the house whom I caught creeping around the corner. He was already watching us when the light hit him, and he had a huge knife in his hand. Once the man's position had been revealed, he began to come toward us as fast as he could. I say that he went as fast as he could because the man wasn't moving very well. He was doing a half hobble, half run toward us like he was injured or missing part of his leg. Fortunately, all my friends had seen him by now, and we all turned and began running very quickly back toward the car. I looked back as I was getting into the car to see that the guy was still coming after us. As we pulled away from the house, 2 of my friends were laughing, saying that they had set the whole thing up. They said they had gotten a kid from school to head out earlier and wait for us so he could come and scare us. I had been the only person to really get a good view of the man who was chasing us, and I knew for a fact that it was not a high schooler. I insisted upon it, telling my friends that whoever it was not the person that they had sent out there to scare us. Sure enough, the 2 friends who had set up the scare checked their phones to find voicemails and texts from the kid who was supposed to scare us. He had been at the house but never got the chance to pretend to attack us because the same guy had gone after him, so he left immediately. He had left voicemails and texts saying to abort and to not go to the abandoned house, but they hadn't seen them due to bad cell service. We had no idea who tried to attack us that night or why, and when the police investigated, they found nobody there. Back in Halloween, I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Ryan. We met up at my house not too long after school and hung out there for a bit. Then we put on our Halloween costumes, where I was Spider-Man and Ryan was Batman. We then left my house and started trick-or-treating in my neighborhood. First, Ryan also lived in my general neighborhood, but was several blocks away. It took probably 20 minutes to walk to his house. Ryan's mom went with us as we trick-or-treated, and we ended up going all the way to his house. Our neighborhood had lots of houses in it, and there were quite a few other kids out trick-or-treating as well. After several hours, we both got tons of candy. It was a great night of trick-or-treating. Then we went inside Ryan's house and hung out there for a bit. My mom was going to come and pick me up at 10 and drive me back to our house. Ryan and I just hung out in his bedroom, eating our candy and playing video games. Ryan's parents and older sister were also home. I remember that we heard a knock at the front door, though, and we both got up to go see. We thought that it was probably more trick-or-treaters, and Ryan wanted to be the one to hand out the candy since we hadn't had a chance to because we had been out. He called to his parents in the other room, saying that he would handle it. When we got to the door, though, we looked out and saw what appeared to be an adult man standing there. The guy was looking down, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that completely covered his head, and we could barely see his face. He did not appear to have any kind of costume on. Right away, it looked suspicious. Plus, it was pretty late at this point. Ryan and I had stayed out trick-or-treating about as late as we were even allowed to. The guy then knocked on the door again, and we were right there on the other side. We didn't say anything, but we went into the other room and found Ryan's parents. We told them that it was just some random guy. By then, the knocking had stopped, and when we walked back to the room, the man was gone. Nobody knew who this guy was or why he was at the door, but it seemed a little strange. Ryan and I went back to his room to continue playing video games and stuff. His room was at the back of the house, and I remember that maybe 15 minutes later, Ryan suddenly told me to look at the window. When I did, I saw what he was already looking at. The same hooded man was standing in the backyard. He was just kind of standing there. The guy was maybe 40 feet from Ryan's window. He did not appear to be looking toward us, and he was still looking down. After watching him for a few moments, we both instantly got up and ran out of the room. Ryan went back toward his parents and told them about it. They looked out into the backyard and turned on the light to the patio. When that happened, the man turned and left the backyard, running away. We never got a good look at his face, and it was really weird. After that, we figured that he was gone for good and probably just a guy trying to mess with people on Halloween, so nobody called the police or anything like that. But it was still really strange. A little while later, my mom arrived at Ryan's house and picked me up. She drove us back to our house, and we got there like a minute later. When we got home, I was in the living room for a while before I had to go to bed. Then when it got late, I went to my bedroom. Like Ryan's, my bedroom was at the back of the house. I remember that I turned my lights out and was getting into bed. That's when I looked out of my bedroom window and noticed what appeared to be the same guy back there. I couldn't believe it. He was standing in the backyard very similarly to the way that he had in Ryan's backyard. For a moment, I really couldn't believe my eyes, but he was there. I ran out of my room and found my parents in the living room. I told them about the guy, and we all went to another back window. By the time we got there, though, he was gone. After a while, I went to bed again. It took me a long time to fall asleep. I kept looking out the window, but the man never returned. Eventually, I did fall asleep, and after that, I never saw that guy again. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends. Halloween that particular year landed on a Saturday, so I was up late by myself in the living room watching TV. Late that night, as I was drifting in and out of sleep, watching TV, I heard a noise from the front porch. It was the sound of the old swing creaking back and forth. It could have been the wind, but I was paranoid as a young kid, and I went to check it out. Cautiously, I crept to the window by the porch and looked outside, and what I saw was horrifying. An older woman, probably in her 50s, was sitting on our swing. She was wearing nothing but a nightgown, and her skin was smeared with blood. In her hand, she held a large kitchen knife. I felt like I was dreaming, but it was all too real. I was only 7 at the time, so I sprinted to my parents' room, yelling and crying that there was a scary woman outside. My dad woke up first and asked me to calm down and explain what happened. I stuttered in between the breaks in my crying that there was a woman on the porch with a knife. I could see the concern in his eyes as he got out of bed, telling me to stay put. I never saw him so angry before, and I was terrified he was going to confront the woman outside. He was still half asleep when he marched to the door, flinging it open to the cold night air. I peered out from behind him, and to my surprise, the swing was empty. I could still hear the creaking of it moving in the night air, and I felt my stomach drop. I thought I had imagined it. My dad stepped out, and just as he was about to turn around, he looked behind the swing. There was nobody there. It was late, and there were no signs of anything unusual, just the swing moving. My dad told me that it was probably just my imagination. I told him it wasn't, but he told me to go back to bed and assured me that everything was fine. For years after that, I never brought it up to anyone. I never forgot it either. In fact, I didn't believe it until I was much older and I had a friend over. She was sleeping over one night, and we were watching scary movies. I had put on a horror film about a home invasion that night. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it had a girl who was home alone in a house. I was nervous watching it, and about halfway through, I decided to pause it and go to the bathroom. After getting out, I headed to the living room. I was feeling a bit paranoid, and as I was walking down the hall, I noticed something outside. Through the window, I could see someone standing out on my front porch. My heart dropped as I realized that it was a woman wearing a nightgown. She was facing away from the house, so I couldn't make out any details, but my blood ran cold. I was too scared to go outside and check, so I took a deep breath and turned around to my friend in the living room. I told her what I had seen, and she laughed at me, thinking I was joking. I knew this was the same woman I had seen when I was 7, but I felt like I was losing my mind. I told her to come look with me, and as we both walked back toward the window, I was terrified. I could hear the sound of the swing creaking back and forth, and my friend noticed it too. We peeked through the window together, and she gasped as soon as she saw the woman. She stood up straight, staring into the night. My friend grabbed my arm tightly, and I couldn't look away. We watched as the woman turned around and looked at us. She had long hair and a sickly pale face. My friend shouted for us to get away, and we both ran back toward the living room. We slammed the door and locked it behind us, terrified. I didn't know what to do. We heard the swing creak once more before the sounds faded away. My friend and I spent the rest of the night awake, terrified. It wasn't until morning that we dared to go outside, but we found nothing. There were no signs of anyone having been there. I never told anyone about that experience, but it was terrifying. There was just something about that night that still lingers in the back of my mind. Halloween night has always been creepy to me ever since. Even years later, I still try to avoid spending it home alone. There's just something about it that gives me chills to this day. It was Halloween night, and I was excited about the party at a friend's off-campus apartment. It was a costume party, and I ended up having a lot of fun. It was packed, and just overall a fun evening with my friends. Eventually, around 1 a.m., I decided to head home after saying my goodbyes. The drive home would take about 20 minutes. As I was leaving, I noticed another car pulling out at the same time, and they ended up turning the same way. I didn't think much of it for most of the drive, but eventually I noticed that they had been behind me for the entire drive, tailing me pretty closely as well. I decided to test it out if I was being followed and tried to shake them off. I made a few turns hoping to lose them, but the car still followed me. At this point, it still could have easily been a coincidence, but I had concerns, especially because of how close they were following me. I turned onto a less traveled road, and the other car stayed right behind me. I glanced at my rearview mirror, and the headlights were glaring back, illuminating the interior of my car. I could see the outline of a figure behind the wheel, but I couldn't make out any details. I even increased my speed, hoping to create some distance. I took a sharp turn onto a dirt road that led to a nearby park, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns, but the car stayed right on my tail. There was no way I was going to let this person see where I lived, so I just kept driving. I decided to head back toward the main road, desperate to find a place where there were more people. Before I could get back to the main road, though, things escalated. I could see them trying to get beside me, speeding up and trying to force me off the road. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the road. I swerved to avoid a collision, and the next time they came up and tried to push me off the road, I slammed on the brakes to avoid them. The pursuing car, which was now ahead of me after I slammed on the brakes, veered sharply and lost control, flying off the road into a ditch. I stayed in my car but didn't leave yet because part of me still wanted to make sure they were okay and call an ambulance if I needed to. After a few seconds, they emerged from their car. The driver stood up and faced me. They were wearing a Grim Reaper costume with a mask covering their face, so I assumed that they must have been at the costume party that I had left from, and followed me from there. After the confirmation that they weren't dead from the crash, I sped out of there and finished the rest of my drive back home. When I finally got back to my apartment and locked the door, I called the cops, explaining the situation and where the crash had happened. I later learned that when they arrived at the scene, the person in the costume was nowhere to be found, and the car they had been driving had been stolen. I was still very nervous after that night because whoever had been following me knew what my car looked like and probably had my license plate. But I never had any following encounters. One Halloween night, when I was 15 years old, my friends and I went trick-or-treating. We were fairly old to be trick-or-treating, but we decided that it would be fun to have one last year going door to door together. We started out in our neighborhood, but we weren't getting much. We agreed to make the trek over to the rich neighborhood, which was known for giving away king-sized candy in the past. The quickest route to the rich neighborhood was a shortcut, including a path through a section of the woods. My friends and I had taken this path many times before to go to other friends' houses who lived in that neighborhood. Personally, I had only been on the path during the daytime, though, and I was a bit nervous to walk through a longer stretch of woods at night. However, the majority of the group didn't want to waste precious trick-or-treating time by taking the long way there, so we ended up taking the shortcut through the woods. As we entered the woods, the light and noise from the neighborhood behind us eventually faded, leaving only the sound of us crunching our way through the leaves in the forest and talking over the talking of the group. I thought I heard something behind us, though. I heard the crunching of leaves sounding like footsteps, but maybe it was an animal. I swung the flashlight behind us, but I saw nothing there. However, by doing this, I did get the attention of the group. Everybody fell silent and stopped walking, turning around to see what I was looking at. I explained that I thought I heard footsteps crunching in the leaves behind us, but that I didn't see anything. We chalked it up to an animal and continued walking, but we all stayed pretty quiet, now whispering amongst ourselves. A few moments later, the noise happened again. This time, everyone in the group heard it, and we whirled around to see two men dressed in all black off the path and a bit in the woods. This was enough to send the group running as fast as we could, wanting to get out of the forest. We didn't dare to look back, but we could hear the two men now crashing through the forest behind us on the path. It sounded like they were gaining on us, but we all made it out of the woods and back into the neighborhood just in time. Once we were back in the neighborhood, we hung around for a bit to see if the two men would emerge from the woods, but they never did. Maybe we just happened upon two guys in the woods, and they decided to play a prank on us. But it was all very strange since we were only 15 at the time, with no adults around. Definitely felt like a dangerous situation. Back when I was in college, I had a crazy experience one Halloween. It was my junior year, and I will also mention that I'm a female for background information. I was 21 and had been going to the university for 3 years. It was a pretty large university with thousands of students, and I lived in an apartment with my roommate. For Halloween that year, my friends and I were invited to a Halloween party. It was at a friend's house who had hosted several college parties earlier in the year. That night, we first went to a bar, and it was really busy there with it being Halloween night. Most people had all kinds of different costumes on and stuff. Then we walked over to the party at my friend's house. It was several blocks away from where we lived, and about a 10-minute walk from the bar. When we got there There was already a good amount of people at the party, and we knew most of them. It only got busier and busier, though. At one point during the Halloween party, one of my friends came up to me and pointed out a guy who was across the room. He was a guy with dark hair, and I'm not even sure what his costume was, but she told me that he was a creep, and she wanted to leave now that she saw that he was at the party. I asked her what he did, and she just said that he was really weird and he wouldn't leave her alone in the past. Then she said that she needed to get out of there before he saw her, and she walked away. I wasn't going to leave just yet, though, because all my other friends were still there. So probably 30 minutes went by, and I remember that all of a sudden this guy came up to me. It was the same guy my friend said was a creep. Personally, I had no clue who he was, and I had never seen him before. I assumed that he went to the same college, though. He said hi and introduced himself to me. I was really not that interested in him, but I did have a short conversation with the guy. He didn't say anything that weird or creepy at first, but he did come across as a little strange. After talking to him for like 2 or 3 minutes, I said that I was going to get something to drink, and I walked away. But the guy just followed me over there and kind of kept talking to me. By then, the party was extremely crowded, and I didn't know as many people there anymore. I really didn't want to talk to this guy, but he wouldn't leave me alone. Then one of my friends came up to me and she said that they were going to Jake's house and asked if I wanted to go. Jake was in our friend group, but I had never personally been to his house. By then I was ready to leave the party, and I said yes, I would go. My friend said that she was going to get one of our other friends and then leave, and then she walked away into the crowd of people. I should have gone with her right then and there, but I didn't. It was so crowded that I didn't know where anybody else was in the moment. Meanwhile, the guy continued to talk to me, and I remember he asked me if I wanted to go to his house. I told him no, I couldn't. I said that I was going to Jake's house. I remembered that this guy said that he knew where Jake lived, and he was also going there. I was not happy to hear that he was going to be there, but I asked him what Jake's address was. The guy told it to me, and I put it in my phone. Then I told him that I was going to the bathroom. I said that because I was afraid that he would want to go to Jake's with me, and I wanted this guy to leave me alone. So I walked upstairs and used the bathroom at the crowded party. When I got out, the guy was thankfully gone. My friends were also gone, though. I looked all around the party for them, and I couldn't find them anywhere. So I put in the address to Jake that the guy gave me. It was like a 15-minute walk, so I set out by myself, and I started walking on the now quiet streets. I made my way along the sidewalk, and I was seeming to get farther and farther away from campus, but I didn't really question it. When I got to the street that Jake lived on, I realized that it looked pretty run down. These houses were not in very good shape at all. I mean, most college houses are old and not in the best shape, but these were really rough. Soon I saw the address, but it just didn't seem right. The house appeared to have the lights off, and I couldn't tell if anybody was there. I double-checked the address on my maps, and it was correct. So I walked up to the front step, and I didn't hear any noise from inside, like people talking or anything. Before I could open the door and knock, though, the door opened. A man stood there wearing all black and a ski mask. I figured it to be a costume for Halloween, but it was still creepy. I didn't recognize the guy. He didn't say anything, but he waved me in. I realized right then that I was definitely at the wrong house because, looking inside, all the lights were out. I started backing away and said that I was at the wrong address. Then I saw another guy emerge from the darkness in the house. It was the same guy who kept talking to me at the party. He told me to come inside, and I told him that this was not Jake's house. The guy then admitted it wasn't and said that it was his house. I turned around and started walking away. The guy actually followed me out of the door, though. He started walking after me outside, and at that point, I just took off running. I heard the guy start to run after me, I sprinted down the street and then went into a random yard. I cut through it and then went into the person's backyard. I then cut through another property to the next street over. After that, I stopped and caught my breath. I didn't see the guy chasing me anymore. I walked along the street a little bit more, and then I decided to pull out my phone. I sent a text to my friends asking where they were. Luckily, they responded quickly and said that they were at another friend's house. I told them where I was, and they said that they would come to pick me up. Once they got there, I hopped in their car, and I told them everything that happened. They were shocked. They told me that they were going to wait for the guy to come out and then confront him if they saw him again, but they didn't end up seeing him. It was a crazy and scary night overall, and I learned to always go places in groups from that day on. I lived by myself in a smaller 2-bedroom house. Last Halloween, something really strange happened. I don't really celebrate Halloween or do anything for it. I'm an adult and I'm not really into horror stuff. And I don't really have friends that are either, so most Halloweens are just a normal day for me. However, I do always make sure to have some candy on hand around Halloween to give to kids. My neighborhood is usually pretty quiet though, so I might get like 10 trick-or-treaters if that. Last year, shortly after I got home from work, the trick-or-treaters started. There were a few at around 5:30 or 6 p.m. I was mostly just in my living room, and I would occasionally get up and give the candy to the kids. I got about the usual amount of trick-or-treaters. By 8 or 9 p.m., things had quieted down significantly, and there weren't really any more people trick-or-treating. But that's when the doorbell rang. As I was sitting there watching TV, I got up and walked over to the front door and looked out. I thought that it would be a kid trick-or-treating, but when I got to the door, nobody was there. I didn't think too much of it and I went back into the living room. Probably 30 minutes later, there was a knocking at the door. It was pretty loud and constant. When I heard it, I got up and the knocking kept going for a good 10 or 15 seconds straight. By the time that I reached the door though, it had stopped. After looking outside, nobody was there again. This time I stepped outside and looked around. There was nobody that I could see, so I went back inside. After that, it was probably just a prank, somebody knocking on my door and then running away. I sat back down on the couch and went back to watching TV. The rest of the night was pretty normal, and eventually I went to bed. The next day was now November 1st, and it was a pretty normal day for me with work and stuff. That night though, at around 10, there was another knocking on my door. This was really weird now because it wasn't Halloween anymore. The knocking, just like the previous night, was constant and pretty loud. I went over to see who it was again, however, the knocking stopped as I approached. When I finally got to look out the window, nobody was there. I once more went outside and looked around. I even walked around the front yard a little bit. I couldn't see anybody though, so at that point I went back in, and I didn't get any more knocking that night. The next night, it happened again. Once more, it was a bit later, and I was in the living room when I heard that same loud, persistent knocking. I stayed put at first, but after about 30 seconds of it, I decided to get up and head to the door. Just as I approached, the knocking suddenly stopped. I opened the door to find no one there. I glanced around and thought I caught a glimpse of someone possibly running away down the street, but I couldn't see clearly. I went back inside, and the rest of the night passed without any more knocking. The next night was completely quiet, and since then, there haven't been any strange incidents. I suspect it was just a prank, maybe by one of the neighbors, but it's still unsettling to think about someone doing that 3 nights in a row after Halloween. Thank you for watching our real horror stories. We hope you enjoyed these spooky tales as much as we loved sharing them with you. If you had fun and want to hear more, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us bring you even more thrilling stories. Until next time, Take care and stay curious.